There are multiple ways to keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast. Through our Instagram handle, the Wolf Connection Pod, and for comments and questions, send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. This is a longtime friend of ours. I was happy enough to meet him at the International Wolf Symposium. We've had him on the podcast before. You've all heard of him. He's the author of two books, Wolfer and Wolfland. He was the Federal Reintroduction. He was part of the Federal Wolf Reintroduction in Canada, Yellowstone, from the wolves from Canada to Yellowstone and Idaho. And he retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2006 and an expert government trapper. We welcome back Carter Niemeyer. Carter, it's great to see you again, sir. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing real good. It's my pleasure to get to visit with you today.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's good. Like I said, it was an honor to meet you and speak with you. I know everybody was hanging around you and stuff like that, so I was happy just to get a couple minutes. But always good to get you back here, so Steve and I can really go in depth with stuff that's happening in the wolf world and the federal world, federal government world, and how it impacts wildlife. I just wanted to get your thoughts really quick about what you thought about the symposium, what it was like to see some of your colleagues. I know it had been a couple of years for some of you all, so just tell everybody what that was like just to go to Minnesota and see a lot of those people there.
Well, it was kind of like a family reunion for me. I've been involved in this for decades, so it's always good to go back and see old friends and colleagues. And, some of us went a few years ago, others didn't. So for some of these people, it was more like maybe 10 years ago I saw some of them. As far as content, the meeting I thought was excellent. It's, we laid the foundation with the wolf reintroduction, and there's a lot of years gone by, and the wolves have thrived from that reintroduction. So I think the young scientists coming along have more time to do a lot more in-depth research, from genetics to food habits to behaviors, and look at their relationship with humans and everything. So I think I was more motivated to go to these different sessions than I've ever been before, because a whole lot of it is new to me.
What was a talk that stuck out to you, if you can remember, that was something that you ran into and you were like, this is something I've never heard of before, or this is something new or groundbreaking?
Oh, golly. All of them were good features. Doug Smith spoke on their research, kind of pooling what went on in 5 different parks from Canada to the U.S. Yeah, and I found all that ongoing research interesting because being retired, I more in hearsay than I am, involved. And I went to a session, a gal named Missy Stein, who I'd never met, talked about a little wolf that got caught in one of my traps clear back in the 1990s, and it had a foot injury. It's a long story, but the pup, people were going to have it euthanized, and I kind of, said, why kill this puppy? It's our fault what happened to it, rather than, kill him and hide it. So the pup went back to Minnesota, and I virtually didn't know if it lived or died. And she gave a presentation talking about this little wolf, how it had to have an amputation, but it lived out its life in captivity, and I believe for 10 or 11 years. It actually survived long after its family members did. And turned out, I guess it's a kind of a celebrity ambassador wolf through its lifetime back there. And it sired a couple of litters of pups. I was just astounded that this little wolf had done all these things before it died here a few years back. So there was these kind of surprises to me that really, made it all that much more interesting.
John, were you at that speech or no?
I was, yeah.
So wait, I wasn't there, unfortunately. So you didn't know about this story before, and it was told in the context of this is a wolf that Carter Niemeyer trapped once upon a time, or you just put the pieces together?
Well, I knew that this talk was going to happen because Missy called me, a couple, 3 months ago, and she didn't really know much about the story on this end, and I knew nothing of the story on that end. So I went back through a bunch of photos I had, and I have my journals, which told, when it happened, what day, and the circumstances. So we traded information, and I just told her I would be sure and come to her presentation to soak up the whole story from start to finish. So we pooled our information together, and it made a complete story.
Wow, you journaled every day in the field. I mean, where is this journal? I need to read this journal.
I have stacks of journals. I've kept track of everything I've done since about September 1973 on a daily basis, and I have life lists. I've kept track of all the wolves I've caught, whether it was foothold traps or helicopter darting, what color they were, what they weighed, which foot I caught them by, and the dates and the location. So yeah, I have absolute in-depth, detailed journals for my whole career.
And any plans with that journal to release it or to?
I've thought about sometimes just having it all printed, put in a great big compendium or something, but I would never part with any of them. But I've thought about presenting it because an interesting thing about my journals too is it's tiring to go back through and read them. Because literally when I was doing what I was doing, kind of the guy on the ground mediating all these conflicts, I about lived in my pickup truck 724, and I was on the road, including weekends and holidays. It was just nonstop from here to here to here. And when I look back, I even wonder sometimes, how in the world did I do all that?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. That would be a multi-day. That would be almost like a week symposium just in and of itself, Carter. If everyone would listen to all the journaling and all your stories, it could easily take up a week of people's time. I'm sure people would love to hear that stuff if it ever came to that.
Well, I've got a zillion stories, and almost any time I'm in a group and somebody brings up a topic, it sends me into, well, that reminds me of the time.
Yeah.
There's not much dealing with wolves and people that I haven't experienced in almost 4 decades.
Yeah, it's been an incredible run, and it's still continuing. I mean, that was the best part for me, for someone who went there to the symposium for the first time, just to see when you and Doug and Mark and Kim and you guys are in a room together. It's really just, it's sort of the Mount Rushmore of wolf people that are really doing the course of work that you guys have done over the amount of decades, and the amount of effort that you've put in is just astounding and incredible to hear. So it's just good just to almost be a fly on the wall and really just hear you guys talk about that stuff and not really interject and soak it all in. It was pretty unique and awesome, just from my perspective, just from being there.
Well, going back to those days, the teamwork was incredible. I come away for the most part with very few bad memories, other than a lot of the tough decisions we had to make about, dealing with the wolf itself. But the superhuman effort to recover wolves, I just hope the public never forgets that, because tremendous sacrifice and risk, people in helicopters and airplanes, just, putting their life on the line every day, and seeing to it that these wolves got, the opportunity to reproduce and increase in numbers. And I think today, I'm not sure people can even begin to appreciate the effort and the tax dollars it took to get them here. And I'm sometimes wishing more people would remember that and act on that.
Before we move on to the current state of things, just because we're here and we're mentioning your past involvement in the reintroductions, wolves from Canada to the U.S., I'm not sure if we covered this in the past. It was so long ago, but this topic, and I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole on this. This is just something that came to our inbox recently, and I thought, you know what, when Carter comes on, I'm going to ask him what he thinks about this. So it's come back into our awareness via a video of a rancher online that's it's been circulating. He's got some pretty good content, but someone sent it to our inbox recently, and it's making the point that, you know, the one thing that people don't understand is that wolves down in the lower 48 are not the same wolves of our American past. They're significantly larger and have a totally different prey drive and a different lust for the hunt, essentially. But I'm wondering what you think about that sentiment.
Well, I'd have to disagree 100% with whoever you're referring to, because first of all, we're talking about gray wolves. Even under the Endangered Species Act, they're listed as a species, not a subspecies. So nobody's looking at whether, you know, the wolf that was here before is Irremotus and the wolves that are here now are from those two sources, populations up in Alberta and BC. But a wolf is a wolf is a wolf, and only a geneticist could probably split out a genome or a chromosome or something to show us some variation within the gray wolves. But the wolves were eliminated, lower 48, most of the country except Minnesota, and the wolves were exterminated, eradicated. They were virtually gone from the lower 48 states, and even were killed up into the southern portions of Alberta, BC, and, you know, some of the Canadian provinces. But when the killing was reduced, stopped, or regulated, 1960s or 70s, when attitudes changed, the only source of wolves in the lower 48 states were wolves from Canada. And the wolves from Canada immediately, in some cases, never stopped dispersing out of Canada into Montana, states, you know, right close to the line. And people just kept killing them. So my point is that the wolves that are here today are no bigger. Certainly, if you want to go up by Alaska, Mackenzie wolf, some of those, there's some heavier body weights. But the wolves that we caught in Canada, I worked with two of the capture specialists, were from Alaska. But one of the first things I asked them when we were darting these wolves, bringing them back in, weighing them, I said, so these, what do you think? And they go, yeah, about the same size as ours. They saw nothing sensational, significant to point out a difference. And I remember, I believe of the 66 wolves that were reintroduced, 35 to Idaho, 31 to Yellowstone, the biggest wolf, or heavy, you know, when you talk about the biggest, we're usually talking about weight. The biggest, heaviest wolf was about 135 pounds. That's about the size of it. I mean, you talk about 130, 35 pound male wolf, you're on the outside edge of normal.
Right. Right.
We've handled wolves in Yellowstone, Doug Smith and I, and other scientists. Some of those tipped the scale at 141, 143, 147, but they had a gut full of bison meat when we caught them. And when you're handling 135 pound wolf on the capture in Canada, who knows if it had 10 pounds of meat in its gut or had an empty stomach. You can really make wolves bigger, depending if he's been eating or not. And my comparison, too, is when you get talking about the wolves are bigger, kind of like taking an athlete in high school, he weighed 190 pounds, and then you send him to the Green Bay Packers training camp, feed him all the bread and eggs and meat you can pump into him, and give him all the exercise he wants. And he's going to bulk up, and he's going to be a pretty big guy. And some of the biggest wolves we've handled are in Yellowstone, where they have an abundance of elk and bison meat to eat. So it's a long answer to disagree, but no, these wolves are not meaner. They're not bigger. They're not more aggressive. All my colleagues and I compared stories. We've never had a close call. These things are, I've walked up on them. I've been 6 feet away from them. All that stuff. And I've never had a wolf show aggression to me. So all that is embellished misinformation, and I'll stand by what I'm telling you. That's what I've learned in 40 years of handling a lot of wolves.
Yeah, I wonder where this idea comes from, because it's been resurfacing lately, as far as I can tell, at least on social media, which, not that social media is always a direct reflection of how the majority of folks are feeling, but just been seeing a lot more about this idea that they're more efficient at running down prey for longer distances. They have different levels of endurance. They kill a bunch of animals unnecessarily.
Surplus killing.
Yeah. And that this particular type of wolf does that more often.
Well, it's anti-wolf propaganda is what it is, because I will dispute. That was my job for 26 years as a predator control agent. 10 years of that was as a wolf specialist working the Northern Rockies, looking principally that my job was looking at dead livestock, determining if wolves killed it.
Right.
And to say that these wolves killed livestock for sport, I will dispute that 100% too. Right. Wolves surplus kill. Growing up as a kid, we had weasels in our hen house that surplus killed.
Of course,
They might kill 30 chickens to eat the brain out of one.
Yeah, I've seen it.
These predators attack and prey. They don't count when they're doing it. So you might get more than one prey animal down at a time. The other thing I'll dispute too is I've seen wolves kill livestock and big game. They don't waste it. Anybody that tells you that I went hunting and saw 10 or 12 dead elk in one day, the wolves never took a bite out of them, that is pure BS. I followed up some of those stories too and found 20 or 30 dead elk on a game range, but it was starvation. It wasn't from predation. So again, I could go on and on and on disputing what you just said, this person said, but it's just not true.
I mean, that's actually a good lead in, Stephen. I'm glad you brought that up to the Meeker in Colorado, the Meeker wolves, because you were talking about this a lot on your Facebook, Carter, with when they initially had, I think eight cows were found dead, or cattle were found dead. Then the number just kept increasing. I think it was up to 40, and they ended up finding that there was no CPW found that there was no basically evidence that wolves killed the 40 cows. But what does it say about that in Colorado, where wolves are set to be reintroduced, that already there's this narrative that, these native wolves that have somehow made their way to Colorado are already killing livestock, at an alarming rate, which is just most of the time not true.
Well, again, that was my job for 10 years. I was the go-to person working on wolf predation in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, mostly in Montana to start with. And it's just, it's so important. You can't have people doing this work that are biased. And, everyone has built-in biases. You can't get away from it. But those who are going to be dealing with this on a day-to-day basis from now until Colorado maybe has a reintroduction, you got to really bite your tongue, look around, study the situation. But I saw it clear back in the mid-1980s in Montana, too. There's this tendency, if you don't think you want wolves around, you're going to really, I talk about trying to drive a square peg in a round hole. You can, if you look at it long enough and if you hammer at it hard enough, maybe you can reshape the peg till it fits the hole. But the bottom line is wolves don't kill that much livestock in comparison to the stock that's available. But you really got to look at the history of an area too, and you got to go back to, I'd say, read some good books and find some good information or interview people with experience. to get some history behind you before you step into this arena. Because wolves kill in a certain manner, but most importantly, you've got to have some history of wolf presence. I mean, I don't think to this day yet you've got a picture of one, any tracks, any howling, or any evidence of wolves at Meeker. Yet there seems to be this persistence in trying to connect wolves to it. And I just go back to the fundamentals. Most livestock, the majority of livestock, you can guess, you can expect are going to die from diseases and respiratory problems, calving problems, the list goes on, eating poison plants. But
right.
Reaching for wolves in Colorado, especially in Meeker, I mean, that's a long reach.
This reminds me of a story that came up a few months ago that we never really talked about, John, but a story that came out of the Shaw Mountains, I believe, which is right outside of Boise, right? A conflict with a few wolves and a large number of sheep essentially fell off some kind of cliff being chased by wolves or something like that. Do you know of that story?
Absolutely. It's in my backyard.
Yeah.
From where I'm sitting here in my office at this time, adding about 3 miles to the distance, probably from me to Shaw Mountain is 5 to 6 miles from downtown Boise. In fact, I went there when I heard about all this. My wife and I drove to Shaw Mountain, and we walked all over it. Of course, I didn't have a knowledge of where there was 140 sheep or more.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I found no evidence of wolves up there. I mean, I walked the roads and trails. It was still dry,
Wow.
and there were still tracks of deer and elk, and you could pick up a coyote track. We walked out some of the trails up there. There's no wolf scat that we could see. And if you saw where Shaw Mountain is, if you had a good wind out of the northeast, you could throw the Frisbee and it would probably land on the edge of the city limits of Boise in the subdivisions. When we were up there, we encountered hikers, bicyclists, people in vehicles, many, many dogs. Talked to a few people that I met on the trail, said, have you ever seen a wolf, heard a wolf? Oh, no, why are you asking? And I said, well, wolves supposedly killed 140 sheep up here. They're going, really? Are you kidding me? Now, it's their word against, I wasn't there, so I don't know what the sheep herders saw. That is not wolf country. It's a fairly isolated little mountain on the edge of Boise. There is timber on the top of it, and there's timber running north from it. It's open. There's hiking trails coming up out of the valley to Shaw Mountain. Authorities who investigated are sticking to their guns that wolves, and I think maybe I don't even know if they got a number, but it couldn't have been, I think, 1 or 2 that they claimed they saw, because I've worked that country in the past, back when I was helping Idaho Fish and Game after I retired, to collar wolves from that region of the country further north and west, or north and west and east. Shaw Mountain is not wolf habitat. Certainly a wolf could wander down there, but I would say whatever happened on that mountain would be a freak, unusual, rare, odd situation. And interestingly, the sheep moved on. Wildlife Services, the federal trappers went up there. They had a deadline to do wolf removals. They found none. They killed none. The sheep moved on. We've never heard another word. There's been no more publicity from anyone encountering wolves there since. So that's my version of the story. All of the dead sheep were attributed to wolves. And from the news story I read too, there wasn't a fang mark on a sheep. So,
but that doesn't sound right. I mean, they would have at least eaten something, I assume.
Well, sheep, dying or even cattle dying. And if there's human presence, like a shepherd with the band of sheep that day, in theory, and certainly sheep, I have pictures in my albums from going back 40 years. I've encountered and seen sheep pileups before. It can happen during a storm at night. They can maybe see something that scares them. I've seen them stampede down a mountain because of black bears, grizzly bears, coyotes. So I guess, again, if you can't totally dispute that it's impossible that it happened, but it's extremely unusual, and I don't think any solid evidence was presented that I was able to get from anyone. And I did some checking and calling, trying to find out more.
Yeah. We talked about this with Cassie Camara from Colorado. She did that media talk. I don't know if you went and saw that at the symposium, where she was really discussing how the media really, obviously we all know this, that it shifts into the mold that is going to either scare people the most or help people the most. And that's what essentially happened in Colorado, why that vote was so close, is that the anti-wolf side pushed the narrative more and more and more, as opposed to the pro-wolf side. And there was just it was really a nice conversation to have with her as she went in depth about what that's about. And you see it all the time. We just highlighted 2 stories where, we're talking about, negative press for wolves. I want to get your feelings on Colorado, Carter, because I don't know if what you think about what the pros and cons of it in terms of the reintroduction plan, the management plan, and how they're going about it. I know they have a stakeholder group. What's your thoughts from the outside looking in of how they're doing, what they're doing, and are they being effective at it to get the state ready for ultimately bringing wolves back at a larger scale?
Well, I don't know if you knew it or the audience knows it, but I was on the TWIG, they called it, the technical working group. So I was a member of the technical working group. So I was,
okay.
Once a month we had a meeting where all of the technical group would meet. And then they call the SAG, I believe, the stakeholders group too.
The stakeholder advisory group, yeah.
And so They had a lot of expertise, people like myself and others who worked with wolves and wolf recovery and a wolf reintroduction. And these committees also had county commissioners, livestock producers, quite a mix of people on these groups. And so again, the meetings are over, and my perception was, like on the TWIG, as far as doing a wolf reintroduction, my term for it after it was done was it was kind of like killing mosquitoes with a sledgehammer, because I think there were 17 wolf experts on our group, our TWIG mainly, or most of us anyway. And reintroducing wolves is not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. It's been done now. We've made mistakes. Colorado doesn't need to make very many mistakes because it's all been done. So it's all been laid out. And I think it's real straightforward when that part of the plan proceeds. That's going to be the simple part. Deciding where you're going to get wolves. There's lots of them. Wyoming's got them. Montana's got them. Idaho's got them. They're right next door. They're either they get trapped or shot up here, or they could get a quick ride down south. You don't want to introduce problem wolves, wolves that got a history of livestock predation. You don't really want to pick from those, but there's a tremendous number of wolf packs out there that have not been involved in livestock predation. To me, the whole conflict is going to boil down to those that want them and those that don't. And when wolves are on the ground, there's going to be all kinds of conflict, real and perceived. There's going to be those who want to whitewash everything and say it just don't happen. But Yes, occasionally some wolves sometimes kill livestock. That's a reality. Do they all go out and hunt down livestock every day because there's a cow standing on the hill and I'm going to go kill it? No, they don't. Most every wolf pack up here, I would say almost 100% of wolves in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming at one time or another, one day, week, or month or another, are next to livestock. So even when we talk about coexistence, people are saying, well, you can't coexist with wolves. Well, we are. We got 2,000 to 3,000, they estimate up here. We are coexisting with them because they're certainly not killing that many livestock.
Yeah, or people.
The problem I see down the road is not where you're going to get the wolves and it's more about where you decide to put them, because you're going to have people love it and you're going to have people that live there and are going to hate it. And there's those who are going to say, well, I'm willing to sacrifice and live with them. And there's others saying, there's just no damn way that these wolves can be here. This is where my third or fifth generation family settled, and we grow livestock and it's incompatible. But if this goes forward, people are going to have to learn to live with wolves, and they're going to have to learn to live with each other. But go ahead.
Yeah. But how is that kind of thing decided on as we get closer to this? Not what type of wolf. As you mentioned, you don't want wolves that have a tendency towards cattle, for example. But how is that decision made? Where exactly the wolves are going to come from? Like Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. How do they narrow that down and actually make the final decision of where they're going to get them?
Well, the biologists who are working with them certainly know, where there's packs living that have got a clean slate so far, that don't have a background or a history of killing stock. So that should be pretty straightforward. Montana, I believe the Cattlemen's Association, or Montana's already said, we're not giving you any. We don't want to spread our wolves to Colorado and make their lives miserable. So we're going to go through some of this politics too, of people going, well, I'm not going to contribute to, dumping livestock killing wolves in your neighborhood. But I don't know. I think the statistics show maybe 20% of the wolf packs in any one state are involved in livestock damage, and there's 80% or thereabouts who aren't killing livestock. So it shouldn't be that hard to pick where you want to get them. And it would make sense. I mean, if Wyoming is closer, logistically, it would be simpler to get wolves right, as close to Colorado as you can get them, because they're knocking at the door anyway, so to speak.
Is Wyoming just begging to give them away, or?
Well, yeah, it just depends who you talk to. I mean, it gets really polarized by some, I think most people say, hey, we're happy to give you some wolves, in a positive way, that, yes, we'll give you some of our surplus animals so you can start yours. Where there's others who are just, going to fall on their sword, making out wolves are so bad, so terrible, so horrible that we couldn't possibly, participate. And I use the word dumping because that's what Idaho claimed from the time we reintroduced wolves into Idaho, is they were dumped on us. We didn't want them. We didn't ask for them. We told you not to bring them, and you dumped them on us anyway. So there will be those in Colorado, I guess, that'll probably choose the same terminology.
Yeah, it seems that way. When we spoke with Kristen Combs from Wyoming Wildlife Advocates recently, because she said that about Wyoming and obviously with the predator zones, the trophy hunting zone, they really don't have much of a shot in Wyoming to begin with, unless they're in the park, in Yellowstone National Park. It seems that might be, like you say, a good place for them to say, yeah, let's participate and maybe help out, because that population is low as it is, to, considering there's lots of suitable wolf habitat in Wyoming. What's your thought on Wyoming just a little bit? because this seems to be seamlessly transitioning here. Just it's amazing to me because I did hear a couple things. Again, I'm going back to the symposium where, and from what Kristen was talking about, that they have such a hard line number of I think it's 160 or 165, whatever it is, for the population, and they're so strict about keeping that number where it is. You know, they can go a little over it, a little under it, or they do the best they can, but it's such a narrow focus. And yet, in a lot of these states, you know, including, you know, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado even, I don't know about Idaho per se, the elk numbers are the healthiest and largest they've ever been. What's the reasoning, do you think, behind Wyoming, I guess specifically for right now, as to why they want to keep that number as low as possible when the game or the prey population is so high and there's really no determining factor of why they can just let it? I think it's 30. What was it, Stephen? 30% above.
Yeah, I think it was 30% above management goals for.
It was 30% above what like management goal for elk. Why do you think that is? Why do you think they allow that to happen?
Well, in my opinion, again, now I'm retired and I can say what I want based on
Sure.
40 years of getting a chance to get form an opinion. But wolf management right now, it's politics. You know, you can talk about science and you can talk about what you want. These wolves are being managed in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming politically. Wyoming is, I guess you can say they're luckier because they're closer to that fine line. But each state and their plans, and each state, after the wolves are delisted, can operate at a line of about 150 wolves in 15 breeding pairs in each of those states. And so you're talking, you could go down to the fine line of 45 packs, 450 wolves, I guess you could call it. And everything else is surplus, according to the politicians. And say what you want, Fish and Game agencies, they're under the thumb of politics too. So Wyoming, luckily, I guess, you know, they're killing wolves as vermin, as they treat them like coyotes in 85, 88% of the state now. A wolf can be killed on site by whatever legal means possible. And those in the trophy zone, they hunt them at a quota, usually 30 to 50 wolves is the line they have to stick to, or they risk going over the number and reducing the number below 150. Technically, if those wolves, you can prove that those wolves are below 150 in Wyoming and you know, trophy zone area, somebody could petition to relist them. That'd mean the Fish and Wildlife Service step back in and take over these states, you know, over their dead body. Do they want the feds ever managing wolves in their state again? So on the contrary, Idaho and Montana claim, Idaho claims we got 1,500 wolves and Montana claims there's 1,200 wolves. So if you do the math and subtract 150 from 1,200 or 150 from 1,500, Idaho and Montana politically considers all those wolves could be killed. They would, I guess, I believe politically they'd love to boast if they could, you know, kill 90% of the wolves in Montana and Idaho right now and show wolf lovers, wolf advocates, anybody out there, look at us. We're managing them. We've only got 170 and you can't do a thing about it. And that's really where management is right now, unless those states get down to that fine line of 150 wolves or less. They're untouchable as far as their management practices, which are extremely generous right now if you want to kill a wolf.
Yeah, we talked about that in Wyoming also. We were talking about what's legal. I mean, they were talking about denning and explosives and gas and baiting and snaring and I mean, basically anything you could think of essentially is what's allowed in the state. I just wonder, and I know it's political and I know it's social. It just seems inhumane. I mean, it is inhumane. And Steve and I bring this up all the time of why this pendulum went so far the other direction. And I understand where states are coming from in terms of government oversight. They don't want people sort of telling them what to do in a way, but it just seems like such an extreme position to take, especially with this species. Grizzly bears are coming down the pike too, and there's a worry for them to be delisted, and then it's open season on grizzlies. I mean, I'm sure we covered this the first time we spoke with you, but I mean, why so extreme, Carter? Is it really just as simple as showing the other side? And it happens, I guess, on both sides too. It happens with people that are pro-wolf that want to shove things in anti-wolf face, and anti-wolf shove things in pro-wolf face. Why is the middle, or the way that you were able to do things back in the 80s and 90s when you were able to get the reintroduction to happen, you were part of it, a huge part of that. Where has that all gone? Is it just because the social structure is broken down, or is it just because politically we're so divided and we just vilify the other side that this is sort of the sticking point where we want to hammer it to the other side and say, like you say, look what we can do?
Well, again, I take liberty saying I've got 40 years of history in this wolf thing. And I'm going to use the word, I absolutely in my heart believe that what you're experiencing right now is retribution. This is payback, especially in Montana and Idaho. I was working in Montana at the time wolves were reintroduced, and after the reintroduction in 2000, I moved to Idaho. So I've had a lot of time to circulate and communicate and get the message from people out there in the field, because that's where I was, on the ground. And there was this resistance from day one, especially you talk about rural communities. You know, you guys are crazy. We grow sheep and cattle here, and we have horses and livestock, and this is no place for wolves. My granddaddy helped kill the last one, and so on and so forth. And we went through the EIS process, and thousands, I mean, it was one of the most commented on EISs ever written. Thousands, tens of thousands of people commented. But the bottom line is, for better or worse, the reintroduction went forward. And it's kind of what you're talking about here in Colorado right now. The majority decided, the sun, moon, stars, and celestial bodies lined up, and the politics in DC all come together to allow this to go forward. And we did the reintroduction. There was a resentment that never went away, especially in the state legislatures and the rural communities who feel they were violated by putting a flesh-eating carnivore in their backyard. Well, if you look at the politics, again, I'm trying not to say it out loud, but if you look at the political structures and the parties in charge and the powers that be in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming right now, they control everything. And that's coming from the state level. So you're talking local politics from the county commissions on up to the state legislatures. If you look at what the state legislatures are contributing, they're the ones who are really, I think, lighting a fire under this whole thing, because they're the ones who introduce the bills, pass the bills, and hand the results to the fish and game departments or whoever and say, make this happen. So right now, part of the make this happen thing is kill wolves liberally. Let's get rid of as many as we can. Let's let them hunt, trap year-round on private land. Let them hunt and trap most of the year round on public lands. Let them use night scopes, predator calls, guns, traps, neck snares, probably heat-seeking stuff if you got the money to spend. So what they've done is liberalize almost anything you do to kill a wolf is legal. And in Idaho, there's no quota, there's no threshold, there's no limit. So if you were, I mean, this is all theoretical now.
Right.
If you were the best trapper in the whole world and had nothing to do but do this 24 hours a day, you could kill 1,000 wolves, one person. All you need to do is have the tags to make you legal in your pocket. Because if there's 1,500 wolves in Idaho, we only quote, I'm speaking for the social carrying capacity is really 150 wolves. Anything above that, 1,200, 1,300 wolves could be killed in Idaho, and the powers that be who manage, quote, manage wolves, can authorize, well, they've authorized that. And Montana, I believe right now you can kill 20 wolves apiece up there. And Montana, by all demonstrations, are trying to be like Idaho. So seems like, I mean, like last year's Montana's legislature just passed more liberalization of how to kill wolves in the state. And I get the feeling they're enjoying it. It's kind of like, if you're a wolf advocate or whatever, do you feel the pain? You guys dumped them on us, 26 years ago, and now it's payback time. I believe that is what's going on.
Having said that, culturally and maybe symbolically, are we witnessing a departure from the Montana that everyone has really grown to admire? I mean, you've been here and involved in some really important conservation and reintroduction milestones that were essentially initiated in Montana, and they've really been a beacon of what some might call, a close to complete, historically accurate North American ecosystem, at least if we compare it to other U.S. states, and we're talking about animals that still actually exist. But are we looking at that same state, or are we watching a fundamental change happening, a paradigm shift, I guess, that will become more apparent in the next, say, 10 years, that this state has just changed as it relates to the topics we're discussing?
Yes. Yeah, I lived in Montana for 26 years, and the politics up there that's going on right now is not, it's not like what I experienced at all. I think, and I think the trend isn't good. I mean, if you tend to support what's happening in Montana and vote that way, then I guess you're going to be a happy camper. If you're not, looking down the road, and again, a lot of this isn't Carter Niemeyer just expressing an opinion. Read, let's look at the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Department's personnel changes that have come about. There's a lot of good people that left their jobs earlier than they wanted. They were, I don't know if you can call them fired or they resigned, but if you're real interested and do some digging and asking questions and looking at things, there's been a lot of good people, good wolf, grizzly bear scientists that have been pushed out. And I think the writing's on the wall that, yes, there's absolutely a paradigm going on up there. And grizzly bears is another one to keep an eye on. There is going to be a push in the West to try and get grizzly bears delisted and make it where people can hang their hide on the wall. Until people wake up and get involved, if you don't like what's going on, I mean, you're going to have to get involved, and you're going to find that it's an uphill slug to try to change what's going on, because I think it starts right in the voting booth. And if voters vote in these regimes that are calling the shots these days, I think we're, at least Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, I don't see any big changes coming politically and who's calling the shots. And again, if you look at what's going on in the legislatures too, there's individuals who create these issues and really push them and inflame them and aggravate them. And unfortunately, a lot of these legislatures are going with that, and it moves forward and it becomes, it's a bill that gets passed. And speaking up for good biologists and law enforcement folks in the fish and game agencies, they have to do what the legislature hands them on a plate. The legislature says, I want this to happen. They got to do it. And then law enforcement too. I mean, as long as I mentioned the word law enforcement, there's not enough, fish and game agencies don't have enough law enforcement presence on the landscape to protect wolves and bears. If you got somebody out there that wants to kill them, poach them, break the law, there's so much seclusion, isolation, and opportunity out there. And we know that's going on too. So,
yeah, I think about that frequently. I mean, how large of an area these rangers have to cover, and how possible it is for someone who means to break the law, and they don't have enough staff to really catch these folks.
Well, and the poachers now are more sophisticated. When I was working in Montana, several people who killed wolves got caught because, first of all, their mouth got them in trouble. They had to brag and boast, and sometimes left evidence behind, sometimes took pieces of the trophy and took it home with them. But now, I mean, you got some poacher criminal dude out there in a truck, rolls his window down, fires a shot across, off a roadway illegally onto some private land illegally, and kills a protected species. And he, if it's out of season, illegally. And they put the cartridge in their pocket and drive down the road. And law enforcement has a next to impossible job of prosecuting anybody. So it's
yeah. I mean, they're using telemetry in Montana. I mean, I've seen posts of poachers boasting about using sniper rifles and killing wolves or predators from hundreds of yards away. Which, I mean, again, that's not fair chase. It's not ethical hunting. I wonder about that too. Carter, why do you think ethical? And again, it's probably the same answer, but I have to, why is fair chase or ethical hunting? It just seems to be on the decline. And we speak to people that do hunt or people that have families that hunt, and a lot of them speak up and say, probably not publicly, but they disagree with a lot of what's happening. So why are those voices so silent? Is it because, again, the politics and where they live and how they, like you say, ultimately vote for things? Or is it just nobody wants to make the wave or throw the stone in the river or throw the stone in the ocean to make the ripples that will eventually enact change?
Well, I think I still believe most people are good. And I know a lot of people that hunt. I keep in touch with some folks up in Montana that, even the government trappers, a couple of them I've worked with, they're good people and they're not out. They don't want to kill wolves. They haven't even personally taken the opportunity to go buy a tag and kill them. So there's a lot of people that carry guns that are ethical hunters. Part of, certifying people to kill wolves, like there initially, and I think it's still required, you have to go to a certification course to trap wolves. And the courses, at least the first ones, were about ethics. Bringing these guys in that are, quote, trappers, or going to be trappers, and teaching them ethics. And I'm a firm believer. I'm 75 years old, and I think if you ain't got ethics, you ain't going to get them from me telling you. Some of the instructors who taught some of those first classes found that there's a lot of unethical guys that showed up at those meetings and said, yeah, I've heard all that. I know all about it. I know how to trap. Don't tell me what to do. You can't teach me. Just give me the damn piece of paper so I can get out of here. They didn't want to hear about ethics because their ethics were, I'll do it my way, just make it legal. And unfortunately, again, the way I look at the way wolves got delisted in the States, I guess it'd be palatable to me. I'm not that unrealistic that I fully expected, they're going to let you hunt and trap wolves when they were delisted. I mean, that was part of the EIS plan. The feds would recover them, the states would manage them.
Yeah. But
when the wolves are delisted and you can kill 5, you can kill 10, you can kill 20. In Idaho now, you can kill as many as you want. It sends a message that cheapens the value of a wolf. We've reduced them down to, I use the word vermin, like a coyote. Wolves right now, as far as I'm concerned, in the Western or Rocky Mountain region, the Pacific Northwest, wolves are nothing but big coyotes. They're 4 times bigger, but they're a canine. And because they're delisted and because the protections have been so relaxed, there's this attitude, just a wolf. I mean, look how they're treating them. Look how they manage them. Just kill it. Get rid of it. States even are kind of sending us that message that they are of no value. And I think that's where there's mismanagement of wolves, is that the Fish and Game agencies, I just don't see them out there trying to say, hey, folks, wolves are beneficial. Kind of like people are doing in Yellowstone. Hey, folks, they're really cool to watch. They're cool to take pictures of. They're cool to listen to them howl. Do you know they actually do cull the herds, and they do many good things for their prey. And look, folks, they haven't wiped the elk out. In fact, the elk have become more numerous now than they were 26 years ago. But I don't see that. And it's all politics. You'll hear somebody say, well, Carter, we got to keep it balanced. We don't want to give the public the impression that we're wolf, a little pro-wolf. Well, I'm looking at it here as a private citizen now, as a hunter, and I'm seeing you politically sending me the message, wolves ain't worth $11 to go kill one. So I think politically, they are absolutely sending a message, whether it's subtle or whether it's subliminal or real, that wolves, we're tolerating them, folks. We're socially managing them to keep people out there on the ground tolerant of them. So that's how I just see it. It's not being managed down the middle of the road. It's just wolves. Wolves are not good, and here's all the reasons why.
It's fascinating to me that, and Stevens brought this up too, just the economic benefits that it's been shown in Montana, and it's been shown with Yellowstone, and I'm sure with other national parks too, about the revenue that gets brought in, strictly because of people wanting to come and see not just wolves, but grizzly bears and all these. I mean, it's, as Steven said, Montana still has this broad ecosystem of animals that you generally can't see all in one area. I mean, if you get lucky enough, you could see lions and bobcats and lynx and just anything you could feasibly think of, you could possibly see it there. And like you say, I guess it just gets lost on people and what they culturally think or socially believe, that these animals don't have the benefit that they're seeing other than what it costs to hunt them down and kill them. Again, we try to wrap our heads around that every episode that we do as to why these 3 states are determined to not see the economical benefit, let alone the ecological and wildlife benefit that all of these creatures have out with the public, which is they're on public lands for the most part.
When you look at how much of the Western United States is public lands, how much of it is Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, national parks, and other divisions too, that all these lands, they belong to all of us. They belong to everybody, regardless of what part of the country you live in. And to simply accept that because 70% of Idaho is public land, that, and I know that's the way Idaho looks at it, is, hey, we'll take care of our own. We'll manage things in our state. if you don't want to come here, you want to boycott us, what, you don't want to buy our potatoes, whatever the argument is, good, don't come, we don't care. But and there's a huge, I mean, if you start really looking deep, the public lands are threatened too. There's a lot of state legislators who would love to take over, possess public land, take away the forest land and the BLM and put it under state management. And that is one commonality. I think whether you're a hunter or a wildlife biologist, a liberal, an advocate, whatever you want to call it, we have that in common, that people better wake up and see how these public lands are being managed and how the wildlife on them are being managed. Because just think if you do live east of the Mississippi River and you're going out west for your family trip and all these things you take for granted. Well, I'm going to go camp here and I'm going to, boat there. And if that all becomes state managed, private owned, you aren't going to do that anymore. I just think we as a country are kind of lackadaisical about taking a lot of this good stuff for granted.
Yeah, that's funny you brought that up. I was going to ask that as like the next thing is just we spoke with, I don't know if you met Nick Jivak at the symposium, but he gave a great talk, and then we had him on the podcast to describe Thurver about just that, about the privatization of public land and hunting land and of hunting specifically. I mean, when we spoke to Kristen Combs too, there was another letter to the editor in that same newspaper that she posted in from sportsmen who were basically saying the fact of we've been hunting as a family for generations, but they're getting priced out. These people, when you're talking about a tag that costs tens of thousands of dollars for an elk or two elk, it's not feasible for the normal person, everyday hunter, sportsman, outfitter, whatever it is, to even charge that much or to be able to compete with that. So if you start privatizing lands and privatizing wildlife now, it's going to become an elite society that no one's going to be able to get in. Do you think that's even something, if people ultimately wake up, to me, I was suggesting it to Kristen, but I don't know how you feel, Carter, that would, to me, would ultimately bring these two sides together to a degree. It would bring more sportsmen and hunters over to the side of, I guess, advocacy work, saying, okay, well, our lands are being privatized and our wildlife's being privatized, so we can't hunt there. And also we're trying to save apex predators, bears and wolves and such. So we should really combine forces and really speak up, because now you have a larger swath of the population who has a mutual interest, like you just said.
Well, yeah, we're a foolish society because there's so many things that I believe we have in common, but we're so divided by, everybody's a member of this and a member of that. And so I don't dare vote for this because I believe in that. And, united we stand, divided we fall. And I know it works on me. I can speak most simply about how I feel about things. I have always been a hunter and a sportsman, always. And I still do some hunting, but I have no interest in killing a wolf or a grizzly bear, none whatsoever. And I think they belong on these public lands and should be managed that way. But there's others who just somehow want to vilify everything, that it's wrong that the feds are controlling the public lands, and it's wrong that these flesh-eating carnivores are out there eating an elk I can shoot. I mean, that is so small-minded. It's right. Look at the big picture. You can still hunt. You can still, you can trap. You can do all these things on public land. And for a reasonable short amount of time, I guess we can all live with it. But when you start dominating that landscape by, again, let's talk about setting traps and snares out there for 6 months at a time. If you're a hunter with bird dogs, you really don't want to take your dog out in that minefield of traps and snares. And you certainly don't want to take your dog and let it off a leash if you did go out there, because it's going to get caught or killed. It just needs to be, I guess, a reasonable allocation of time on how these landscapes are used. And of course, speaking as a biologist and a naturalist, I think the wildlife on those public lands absolutely, in my opinion, come first. Their welfare, their sustainability, that should be the priority over a gas well or an oil well or mines or whatever. And as far as a hunter, you can go out there and deer, elk, and moose are abundant. Go shoot one. Just don't shoot the wolf and the grizzly bear when you encounter it. You can pick the species and leave others alone.
Right.
But people are lousy at policing themselves. That's what I've come to conclude. And I guess the bottom line, what I'm trying to say too, is I just quit belonging to anything anymore. I used to subscribe to magazines. I used to be a member of this group and that group. But when they stop representing me, then I can't, in good conscience, be a member.
Yeah. Well, we only have a few more questions left, but my last question is something you mentioned there. Why do you draw that line? Why do you feel like you have no interest, even though you are a lifelong hunter? Why do you have no interest in hunting a grizzly, for example?
Well, first of all, I've been privileged. Back in the day, when I moved to Montana in the 70s, and for that 26-year career working in predator control, I captured problem grizzlies, ones that got into livestock. We relocated all of them. We didn't kill them or anything. And I've handled literally hundreds of wolves. I've captured personally, not counting helping others, I've caught 300 wolves. And all the ones I caught in foothold traps were released with a radio collar, and I never killed a wolf in my career, except I did kill, I've been credited too, Carter Niemeyer's killed more wolves than anybody in the North American continent. I killed 13 from helicopters with a shotgun back in the day because it was part of my duty. I had no choice other than quitting my job. But I minimized that. So that privilege of being close to those two kinds of animals, I don't need to kill one to be macho, for the ego, for the testosterone, whatever drives people. I have no desire to hang a grizzly bear on the wall or have a mounted wolf in my backyard with a teeth barred, and all this stuff. So I spend my summers, especially late summer, out finding wolves, getting them on my trail cameras, howling them. And when I find a pack, I put my tent up as close to them as I can get without disturbing them so that I can hear them howl all night. That's the joy I get out of being around these large carnivores. And I do hunt elk each year successfully, and my wife and I eat that meat because we consider it healthy, organic, all those good things, and that is our red meat source. So everything else now for me can run free or pose if I can get a picture of it or something. That's the only shots I take for the most parts with my camera.
My last thing for you, Carter, is I want to get your thoughts about your friend, your colleague, Doug Smith, because he is set to retire. What has that partnership been like for you? And what does it mean to really the wildlife community, not just wolves, that he's stepping down and retiring? And what do you think, if speaking from your perspective, what do you think that legacy will be that Doug will be leaving behind him with all the scientists and the biologists that are going to be taking on his stead?
Well, first of all, I didn't plan it this way, but Doug and I were on the phone together about two hours ago for the first time since he retired.
Wow.
He's a friend, a close friend and a colleague, and he is an ultimate scientist. He is as professional as they get. He's the ultimate researcher. Speaking of a legacy, oh my God, if you look at all the things that Doug has his name on and how he has followed up after the wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone Park to continue winter studies and summer studies and radio tracking year round, and provided opportunities for a multitude of young people and graduate students that have come and gone and furthered their careers. And all of the knowledge that Yellowstone has provided for our nation as far as understanding and appreciating what wolves, the animal, appreciating everything about them, their ecological value, their behaviors, everything about them. We know so much. So Doug's legacy is, it's unforgettable, and those shoes are going to be really tough to fill. I know somebody will come along that probably would be worthy and capable down the line, but to me, it's a tremendous loss too, because he's really the last, from my generation and my viewpoint, he's the last wolf expert standing from our original team that was assembled back in the 80s, for the wolf reintroduction. And he's been a strong voice and a tremendous influence on our nation and everybody who knows what Yellowstone Park's about too. So, it's a tremendous loss. But walking in similar shoes, I know the pressure he's been under and the strain on him and his family. And I know that when he takes a few deep breaths and steps away from it all, that it's going to be refreshing and well-deserved and long overdue too. So I'm glad to see that he's still a fairly young man and has a whole lot of things he can still do. And you haven't heard the last of him.
No, definitely not. Before we let you go, because I have to ask this, what is one, if there is a story that you can cherry pick from you that you and Doug encountered in your time, what's one thing what's a story that you can just cherry pick right now and tell people that sticks in your mind right now, just knowing that he's officially retiring and things like that?
Oh man, Doug and I have, early on when the wolves were first reintroduced to Yellowstone, and within a year or less, Doug used to call me, and I was sort of the canine or the dog catcher for all the different agencies. So Doug would call me and say, Carter, the Nez Perce wolves, they're out of the park. Carter, the Rose Creek wolves left. We got to get them back, man. So him and I, we spent hours and hours camped out in hotel rooms, and Doug always remind me about all the horrible, he says, when I first got hired on, you didn't have much of a budget. And often when they put us up in a room, it was him and I together. And I've always called him the pup, and I've referred to myself as the alpha. So the alpha has picked on the pup forever. But, we've had so many fun times together. I think about when the Rose Creek pack, we went out, Doug and I and others went out and got them back when they left the park. They had pups over by Red Lodge. We rescued the puppies, and I trapped the female, and we brought them back, put them in the pen, and then the windstorm come along and blew all the trees down on the Rose Creek pen and crushed the fence panels. And I remember Doug calling me up saying, Carter, the wolves are out. The Rose Creek pups are, you've got to come over and help us. So I went over there, and he and I and Mike Phillips spent several nights camped out in the back of this old travel hall or whatever it was, and checking traps on the hour. Doug had a headset on, and he was monitoring. We had radio transmitters on the traps so that if something stepped in one, we knew it instantly and we could go up there and take them out. So I caught, I think, 3 of the puppies in traps. So Mike and I and Doug had to walk up at 1:30 in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, and grizzly bears were hanging around the pen because all of the meat they were putting in there feeding the wolves. So walking up the hill, you see these flashlight beams going all directions. We're just trying to watch and see them, made sure we didn't walk into anything. And probably the most memorable was in the downtime, rather than sleeping, we sat in the moonlight playing Hearts, the card game, near the fire, and just chilling out, laughing, joking, and just over there in Yellowstone, reaping all the benefits of the wolf reintroduction. So, that was probably one of the most special times that I remember, just having several nights together.
Man. Yeah, I'm going to just float this out into the universe and say that you and Doug should work on a book together. And that would be probably one of the most epic publications of all time if you guys just put your stories together. Oh man, that would be fantastic. Carter, I
wish we had a picture of this trio as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You Mike and Doug. That would be great. That'd just be the cover. This is again, I can't appreciate you enough for your opinions, your knowledge, your candor, everything that you shared with Stephen and I, again, for the second time. We just feel really lucky that you're accepting and able to tell us everything that's going on in the landscape from someone who has as much knowledge and passion as you. So again, thank you so much for making the time and talking to us again. It really is a pleasure. Well,
I feel privileged that I have an outlet to express my feelings sometimes, because I get kind of frustrated talking to myself. So thanks for picking my brain and letting me expound for a little bit.
Absolutely. Listen, you always have a home here. So if you ever feel the need to not talk to yourself, we can be your sounding board. All right.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. You guys have a happy holiday season.
You too, sir. Take care.
You too, Carter. Stephen, I'll be with you next time, everybody. How's to y'all, and we'll be with you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the donate tab, and find out more information.